Thank you all so much for taking time out of your day to attend. My name is Bali Kumar. I'm CEO of Lean and Green Michigan. We are the PACE administrator around the state of Michigan. First, I just want to say that I hope everybody's safe and I hope everybody's doing well. You know, we are living in a crazy world, and I always want to start off a lot of my conversations with, you know, sending folks best wishes. So doing that, give a bit of the history of this event. The Southeast Michigan PACE Summit was originally planned to be at Ann Arbor Spark in April. And obviously, for a variety of reasons, that's no longer happening. So what we did was we pivoted, and we wanted to make it such that we could try to replicate the experience as best as possible. And so this is our best attempt. Apologies for any issues with you know, some of the technology stuff that we're trying out for the first time, but I think this is going to be a really good experience for folks on the call. A little bit of history or, you know, updates from the PACE market in Michigan thus far. We closed 2 PACE deals last week, so the PACE market is up and ready to go and is rolling now. We are working on closing another deal that's going to be in Washtenaw County in the coming days. So stay tuned for some more good PACE news. The first thing I must do is thank our sponsors. Our sponsors have been very supportive through the transition from an in-person event to a virtual event. Very appreciative. Thank you, PACE Loan Group and PACE Equity, for being summit sponsors. The next level, thank you to our breakout sponsors. The summit sponsors and breakout sponsors will have breakout rooms for you to stop in at a couple of portions of the day. So stay tuned for that. That's on your agenda. So thank you to Plug Smart, PACE Funding, Twain, Petros, Edison Energy, Greenworks, and G Energy. Thank you to our summit supporters. So many summit supporters have helped spread the word and have been great partners over the years. So thank you to our summit supporters as well. And I mean, I obviously have to thank the attendees. Thank you for taking time out of your day again. And I'd be hugely remiss if I didn't thank Christian Koch and Katie O'Leary, who did so much work in pulling this together. This is a mammoth pulling together of events. And so thank you guys both as well. So the purpose of today's event, we want to educate folks about PACE, you know, take people's understanding to a deeper level. We want to demystify PACE for some folks on the call. We want to give a bit of an update on what the PACE market is looking like. And we want to facilitate connections. And so that's really the purpose of the breakout rooms, for folks to reach out to, you know, develop relationships with PACE lenders and with PACE contractors. So the first thing I want to do is take a poll and see who's in the house. Who do we have here? So that way, you know, folks have a good idea of if the room is packed with one type of person or another type of person. I think it's a good way to introduce. So here's the poll. So we have a good smattering of folks on the call. We have some energy contractors, a lot of economic development folks. We have a couple capital providers. We have a couple PACE administrators. We have some property owners. So I think it's good to know that we have a good representation of folks in the room. Thank you for that. All right, so what is PACE? Just going into the 101. I think really PACE is just real estate financing. Folks can identify it however they'd like. They could identify it as sustainability real estate financing. They can identify it as a myriad of things, but at the heart of it, PACE is a way to finance commercial and industrial property owners' buildings, so that way they can make them more energy efficient, water efficient, and do so in a cash flow positive manner. That's what the graphic shows at the bottom. You have a long repayment, and it ends up being a small repayment because it's a long repayment. And the cost of energy goes up over time, the cost of water goes up over time, and so the savings goes up over time. And when the repayment is small and the savings is big, it's really a no-brainer. PACE is also an economic development tool for the toolkit. So just always keeping that in mind, that PACE is a job creator. It's a way to help businesses. It's a way to make buildings more energy efficient, but also it's good for the bottom line. So the way that the Property Assessed Clean Energy Act is set up in Michigan, local governments have to opt in to creating a PACE district. And so we have worked with 44 local governments, soon to be 45, maybe even 46 in the coming weeks, to set up PACE districts there. Here's our map, which is available on our website and is continually updated to show where we have PACE districts set up. What's interesting to note is that the green areas are where we have it set up, but 71% of the state's population, close to 72 actually, live in these districts. So we have a lot of the state, and if we don't have a portion of the state and there's a potential PACE project there, we will work with the local government to help them set up a PACE district. All right, who are we? We are Leaning Green Michigan. We are a PACE administrator, and we're the PACE administrator in Michigan. What we do in this graphic, I think, shows what we do pretty well. We engage lenders, and we want to make sure that lenders are participating in the market at a high rate. You know, we don't want there to be one lender. We want there to be a competitive marketplace for lenders, so that way folks can get the best rates possible. We've done contractor training, where we train contractors to be able to work on PACE projects. We do one-on-ones with property owners, and we do events like this to educate folks. We really just coordinate the Michigan PACE market, and we definitely ensure that projects are compliant with state law. So the Property Assessed Clean Energy Act is what governs PACE financing, and a lot of what we do is make sure that projects conform to a pretty nuanced law. We engage with local governments, and we do a lot of due diligence on projects, and we work with the lenders and contractors on that. And we're just a resource for everything PACE related. PACE is complicated and nuanced, and we're not asking folks to go out and memorize the whole statute and go through it all. We're just saying, think about it, give us a call, and we'll take it from there. More good things to know about PACE. PACE is 100% financing. If you have a retrofit project and it's going to cost you $1 million to do the retrofit, then it probably just makes sense for you to take out 100% financing from the moment you need the money. So that way what you do is you complete the project, start reaping savings immediately, and then eventually the savings more than pays off the investment. Loan to value ratios matter, and that's something that I'm sure folks will go into later in the day, but PACE won't make a property underwater. We're seeing folks do 25% PACE assessment versus the property value as complete. So it's a way to get some good financing in, but it won't make the property underwater. When I say long-term loans, I'm saying up to 25 years fixed interest. So, with those long terms, the repayments are small, and that's way more beneficial than if folks go to a bank and get a 5 or 7 year loan, which is what a lot of banks are offering for commercial and industrial properties. Guaranteed cash flow, positive projects. The state law says that if you're taking out PACE financing in excess of $250,000, has to be cash flow positive. The savings has to be greater than the investment. So again, it's a no-brainer if you're saving more than you're investing. PACE assessments are non-recourse. There's no personal guarantee required necessarily. PACE, the Property Assessed Clean Energy Act, is a property tax, and property taxes are not recourse to the borrower. They run with the land. Payments for PACE projects can be passed down through tenants, through triple net leases. It's another key facet of PACE. And honestly, instead of thinking, oh, this is probably only clean energy and about solar or something like that, the conservation measures that qualify under PACE are quite broad. And so honestly, just give us a call and we can talk it all through. All right, so why PACE? There's a ton of waste of energy in commercial buildings, and wasted energy is wasted cost, is wasted money, especially during times like this. We don't have money to waste. So folks should really be thinking about this. We throw our market data up on our website. So this is a website that actually is in the process of being updated, because now with closing 2 more projects, that brings us up to 26 PACE projects that we've done in Michigan. And I think we'll be around the $40 million mark of investment in PACE projects. Obviously, millions of kilowatt hours of electricity savings, hundreds of thousands of tons of CO2 savings, millions of gallons of water saved. But again, 37 million over the projects that we closed before last week. Investment, 65 million in savings. So again, no brainer. And there's a job creation element to it as well. So yeah, I say energy efficient buildings make sense because if you're building a building to code, or if you have an old building, it's really just the worst building you could legally have. So energy efficient buildings have higher property values, so that's good. Reduced operating costs, which make the PACE project really accretive to the bottom line. Some tenants are either retained better or attracted when it's an energy efficient building, and it can be a more comfortable building. So this is something that is an attraction tool for landlords. Local building stock is improved after PACE projects are completed on the buildings. And obviously, reduced greenhouse gas emissions, reduced water consumption. It's the right thing to do in so many ways. All right, what's the PACE process like? There's a property owner, there'll be a contractor, there'll be a lender, and then we work with the local government. And the reason this is a circle is because folks come in different stages. Sometimes a contractor has a relationship with a property owner and they're thinking, oh, maybe during this downturn right now, if things are a bit slow, this is a good time to do a capital upgrade. The contractor has their roles, the lender has their roles where they're doing a lot of underwriting. We coordinate the parties and we do a lot of the drafting of documents to get this special assessment put on the property. And what types of properties qualify? Commercial and industrial properties, so hotels and hospitals and offices and restaurants and more. Multifamily housing, we have worked on some market rate housing, and we're talking to MISTA about how to fit in with low income housing and LIHTC deals. Agricultural properties are commercial properties as well, farms, wineries, and more. Nonprofits, so houses of worship, we'll hear a bit about that later, and we'll hear about more nonprofits as well. Private schools qualify as long as the property is owned privately and not by a local government. We should be looking at a PACE deal. Also, we're seeing a lot of retroactive refinancing, reimbursement type situations where for any of the above types of properties, folks are saying, I actually did some upgrades last year and I paid for it out of pocket. I'd rather put that money back in my pocket and pay it back over about 25-ish years. So reimburse myself and then use that refinancing technique. What sorts of upgrades? Energy efficiency, water conservation, renewable energy, pretty much anything you can think of that falls into one of those buckets we should be talking about. So, it's not just solar and wind, lighting, HVAC, windows, insulation, a retrofit of an older building, a lot of stuff will fit in. Even when you're doing a gut rehab and you have some old equipment in there, theoretically you could use, let's get some energy efficient equipment in there. You might have to do that stuff anyway. We should be talking about financing that through PACE. And of course, the way forward is to start generating energy on site. So, for folks who want to do that, then we should be talking about financing that. And we're seeing projects finance things in all 3 of these buckets. 12, 13 different measures together can create a really nice PACE project. So yeah, we spoke about retrofits and gut rehabs and new construction. PACE financing fits into all of those capital stacks, and refinancing as spoke about before. Pace Express. So the statute says that for projects over $250,000, that the savings has to be guaranteed to exceed the investment. So that is, another piece of diligence that's required, some more work that it takes to do a standard PACE project. But for PACE Express, there's no such requirement. So the energy audit is lessened because you probably just need more of a walkthrough, like a level 1 ASHRAE energy audit. There's no guarantee that's required, although, some folks might want some assurances that their savings will rival their investment to justify. But in other ways, it's pretty much the same thing as a PACE deal. It's just quicker, cheaper, faster. Capital stack. It's very important to ensure that we have a good capital stack for some of the more complicated projects. So we're seeing bank financing. Some folks are rolling in historic tax credits and brownfield funding and MEDC CRP funds, which I'll talk about in the 501 Ionia case study. Solar tax credits and utility programs have some incentives and rebates. So basically, roll in as much as possible. Case studies. So I mentioned the 515 Ionia PACE project. There were so many different things that brought this deal to fruition. There was PACE financing. MEDC stepped in with some community revitalization program funding. There were historic tax credits and brownfield funding. And sometimes it really takes a lot of incentives to get a deal to the finish line, and PACE is one such incentive. The Whitney Restaurant in downtown Detroit. This is a project where the property owner took out about $860,000, and their total savings over 20 years is expected to be nearly 2.1 million. So great project. If you've ever been to the Whitney, you should go back once we open back up. And if you haven't been there, you should put it on your list of things to do. But, they just did simple stuff. They upgraded their HVAC, they upgraded their lighting. Building controls is a big winner. Storm windows, efficient kitchen ranges. There's so many ways to save money, and PACE can finance it. The Cambria Hotel, here's a mostly new construction PACE project. And the capital stack was around $50 million. About $7 million-ish was financed through PACE. Term of 20 years for the payback. And the savings is looking like it's going to be around 10 million over the life of the assessment. So, they did various upgrades to the building, and it's going to be a great hotel. Our case studies are on our website, so feel free to check out our website. They are constantly updated once we close projects and upload new case studies. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to us. I'm Bali at leaninggreenmi.com. We have Todd, our general counsel, and Christian, who does business development. Todd at Leaning Green MI, and Christian at leaninggreenmi.com. So I'm actually running 4 minutes early, but I would like to move us on to the next part of the summit, which is anatomy of the PACE deal. I think that this is, they'll very, very nicely use the additional 3 or 4 minutes. And I will pass it on to Rafi, Sonya, and Todd.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Todd Williams. As Bali mentioned, I'm General Counsel with Leaning Green, Michigan, and happy to discuss the anatomy of a PACE deal. And today, with me are Rafi Golberstein of PACE Loan Group and Sonya Delley of PACE Equity, who I'm going to let introduce themselves, as I've found that I generally inadequately introduce people. So I'll turn things over to Rafi first. Rafi?
Cool. Thank you. Thanks for having me, and good to virtually see everyone today. As Todd said, my name is Rafi Golberstein. I am the CEO of PACE Loan Group. We are a PACE lender based in Minneapolis. My background has been in commercial real estate lending my entire career. And as Bali said, really PACE is just real estate loans. And so it's relatively straightforward with a lot of nuances and stuff like that. But we are out there writing PACE loans across the country, and are working on several in Michigan right now, and look forward to having this conversation with you, Todd.
Thank you. Sonya, turn things over to you.
Hello, sure. Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. As Todd has said, my name is Sonya Delley. I've been with Pace Equity as a funder for the past couple of years now, but I bring with me over 30 years of commercial banking experience, having financed real estate development, largely in urban environments. And it has truly been a pleasure to be involved in this space. I enjoy real estate and I enjoy the art of creating the capital stack, and that's exactly what this program does. It truly helps to make a deal happen. And having worked with most of the development incentives that are available to us, this is by far, in my mind, the best. I am very much engaged right now in Michigan, looking at several opportunities. Pace Equity has a footprint over 20 states with people like me in them, managing the programs for those states. And it's a great time to revisit Pace and how to get it into your transactions. Happy to be here and happy to talk about it.
Thank you both very much. I think as everyone can see from Bali's slides going through, Pace has just an awful lot of moving parts. In particular, a lot of similar players, no matter the complexity of the deal. And look, there's always a property owner. There's almost always a contractor or two or three. There's always a jurisdiction, which is where Lean Green Michigan comes in. And there's always at least a PACE lender. Sometimes we get into a senior lender or three senior lenders, depending on the complexity of the project. So I've always loved, kind of traditional PACE, simple retrofit of a property where, it's very easy to get your head wrapped around all of the moving parts of the property owner has an old furnace and needs to swap it out for a new one. But frankly, I've not seen that simple of a project in a very long time. So we're always excited by those, but today we're going to talk a little bit more, focus a little bit more on the lending side of the anatomy of a PACE deal. Certainly, if you have questions, we will take them as they come. Please type them into the Q&A box. You've got a rare opportunity to pester me and to pester two of our lenders on the nuts and bolts, what they're looking at when they're looking into financing a PACE deal, what will make a good PACE deal for them. So without any other questions, I'm going to pester them myself and mostly pick their brains. So there are a number of kind of general concerns or general areas that we look at as a program from a statutory standpoint that also mirrored by the lender. So when we're looking at it for valuation, for example, and we'll touch on that first, we're looking at the underlying property value so we can assess whether or not the assessment would be statutorily compliant. But at the end of the day, this is also a loan. So I'm just curious, Sonya. I mean, we've got two different metrics we look at for valuation, and we just curious what type of metrics you look at in determining property value and if it's a good fit.
Well, that is a very good question. And for any PACE deal that is PACE equity deal that is $500,000 or more, we do look to an MII appraisal to determine the value. There's under 500,000, we can look at what's called a desktop appraisal. Mm-hmm. So it's not as costly to the client as an MAI appraisal. Short of having eventually we have to have the appraisal, but during the underwriting process, if the appraisal is not available or a desktop appraisal is not available, then we're going to look directly at the construction costs primarily to determine value. I tend to continue doing an NOI cap rate valuation as well to try to get a flavor for exactly where we are from a valuation standpoint. PACE does have a PACE loan to value limitation. Bali just spoke to that because we do not want a project to be burdened with too much debt. We're not
And
about.
Sorry to interrupt, but for clarity for us, I mean, what we're looking at is the PACE assessment compared to the property value or the ATV to be around 25%. We also look at the overall indebtedness of the property. And so, we try to keep that under 90%. That's really the PACE loan plus any other debt that's there. So
That's good clarification.
yeah.
Yep.
Are there particular thresholds that you guys look at? I mean, would you go?
Oh, sure. We're the same. Yeah, we like to live around 20%, but we do have the internal ability to make the decision to go higher. But typically it's going to max out at 25.
Okay. Rafi, how about you?
I'd say it's largely similar to what Sonya said. I think that our thresholds probably vary a little bit. For us, our loan to values are typically going to be capped at the lesser of state statute requirements, or 30% of value. So we have some flexibility depending on where we're working. And on the appraisal aspect, for us, generally, if the loan is less than $1 million, we'll accept a non-MAI appraisal, whether it's a broker opinion of value or other forms of value metrics. We'll look to use those. But really, I mean, at the end of the day, we're real estate lenders. So the first thing I look at when we're looking at the deal is really the property itself, is the bricks and mortars. And the first question I always ask when we're reviewing deals is this an asset that we believe in and that we like? And so that really is our fundamental approach, is really through the real estate lens of is it a quality asset? And in most cases, the answer is yes. And then we're looking for the red flag issues, like are there environmental issues on the property, which you may want to talk about later, Todd. But really, it's just making sure that we like the asset, and then from there, we can kind of get into the weeds on the rest of the stuff.
Mm-hmm. What I can say from a program standpoint, I mean, we're almost always more concerned about the property, but I think from a lender construct, you have to be concerned with the property and a little bit of the property owner as well. So I am kind of curious, when you're looking at a project, how much do you evaluate the quality of the current property owner?
Yeah. That's an interesting question, because one of the many nuances of PACE is that PACE assessments are freely transferable upon a sale. And when you're thinking about a loan that could be a 20 or 25-year fixed rate loan, it's not unlikely that through the life cycle of that property, you may have 2, 3, or 4 owners that have subsequently assumed the PACE assessment on the property. And so we will certainly underwrite the original owner of the property that we're making the loan to today. And what we're really looking for is disclosures on bankruptcies, any sort of criminal activity, really sort of know your customer type disclosures. But beyond that, we're also very mindful that they could sell the property tomorrow and we have someone else and we have no say over who the new owner is. And so we try to do our homework, but also not be overly punitive, because at the end of the day, we have no control over what the future owners will look like.
Mm-hmm. I agree with what Rafi just said. And I believe, though, we all have to understand that the riskiest part about a real estate transaction is the construction period. So we absolutely have to concern ourselves with the development team, whether or not the sponsor has participated in the development of such assets of similar scope and scale, and where they are, in their overall process. If they have not dealt with a project of similar scope and scale, then they would need to incorporate into their development team a fee-for-service developer, perhaps. There's many ways to skin this cat in this particular concern, So we would be flexible in helping to provide solutions, but I will say most times developers, when they come to us, they pretty much have their deals baked. Some don't, but at some point, I call it adding value or giving value. if you can explain, consider these additional options as you walk through your pre-development process. And that's not just getting the PACE loan, because there's senior debt typically as well. And so in those cases, I'm truly putting on my banker's hat and saying, this is what your banker is going to be looking for.
Those are excellent points. And I can say we've very often, when a new deal comes across our desk, we'll at least reach out to our jurisdiction and ask if they have any known issues with the individual property owner. And to date, we have not run into a problem. But in all of my time in PACE, I know I've run into that in another state where it was just a known bad actor. And so it's, property ownership might not be the first issue or first major threshold issue, but it clearly will get looked at a little bit. But back to the property, I mean, Rafi brought up a good point of, I know you guys, when we've worked on deals in the past, have pulled an environmental report. What sort of red flags are you looking at in qualifying the property? Throw it to Sonya first.
Oh, sure. That it's contaminated. That's the red flag. The burden, if there is a senior lender in the deal, with a new construction deal or a gut rehab, there will be 9 times out of 10 a senior lender at the table, a bank or a debt fund. And they're going to do that level of due diligence, taking a mortgage lien on the property. So we don't actually have to concern ourselves with the process as much as just a simple review of the documents and to make sure that the appropriate steps are being taken to remediate and address any contamination on the property. Yes. Now, if we're looking at a retrofit, then the assumption is that that's already been dealt with because they're in the property and they wouldn't be in there 9 times out of 10 if it were contaminated and had not been cleaned up.
That's such an optimistic point of view. I really appreciate that. The lawyer in me never assumes that a property has already been cleaned up, but.
No, I understand. Of course, the due diligence has to be done. Absolutely.
Rafi, any particular red flags that you've seen, whether it's just the environmental or anything else when you're looking at a property?
I mean, Sonya and I have the benefit of both coming from the lending background, so I think many of our initial responses are the same. But yeah, contamination is the big one, and so and that's not to say that any asset that's contaminated is a no-go. There's many ways to work around potential contamination, and we just need to make sure we understand what the issue is. Then we can work around that issue. We want to make sure we can be problem solvers and not just throw out deals that have issues, because there's a lot of properties out there that have contamination, but doesn't mean you need to always do something about it. In many cases, the recommended best action is actually do nothing, which is okay as long as we can make sure that actually is the end course of action. But on a high level, certain asset classes almost always fail the test, and those are going to be gas stations and very often dry cleaners. They're really, really hard assets to finance unless you have some sort of no further action letter from the state, or some very clear documentation on sort of no responsible party and or complete cleanup of the site. Outside of those 2 asset classes, we're pretty good about getting creative with working to ensure that the risk has been capped. And then, Todd, to feed into your lawyer side here, we'll often also layer on an environmental indemnity if we think it's warranted, just as an extra layer, to make sure someone sort of has the ball on what the various environmental issues may be.
One of the upsides, guys, too, to remember for the audience, for any developers out there, that the upside of contamination is going to help the property meet the test for if your deal is sizable enough to do a brownfield TIF, which will reimburse you for all of the costs you spend in remediating the property. Also, I do know Wayne County. I'm not sure about the other counties, but I would encourage listeners to check in with your counties and see if they have funds specifically for cleanup of contamination. So there is a way to help underwrite those kinds of challenges, and we're very comfortable in doing so at Pace Equity.
I think that's an important point. You know, greenfield development's always nice and straightforward, but you know, frankly, we've got a lot of grayfield and brownfield assets and properties within the state of Michigan, and Pace bundles nicely with brownfield cleanup and remediation funds, and so don't sleep on those projects just because the first initial environmental looks bad. But Rafi, you started to get into asset classes, which was timely because we just got a question in the chat box. What type of asset classes do the lenders see as particularly active right now? And with COVID slowdown, what type of assets might really need Pace? So what's your favorite asset classes?
I mean, for us, anything that's not a single family home is generally fair game. Asset classes that we have the most difficult time underwriting are going to be agriculture assets, just because, again, we take the approach as real estate lenders, and I can underwrite a real estate deal pretty well, but candidly, I cannot underwrite an agriculture deal very well. So I have a little more pause with those. And, you know, houses of worship are tricky. I know that there's going to be some conversation about those later. We are looking at one in Oregon right now, but it's very case by case for us. You know, I always say, and it's kind of a joke, but there's also some truth to this, like, you don't want to be the one that's going out there foreclosing on God if they've just defaulted on their taxes or their assessment payment. So they're hairy asset classes. Outside of that, you know, we're doing self-storage, hotel, office, retail, industrial, multifamily, senior living, everything. Where we're seeing the most need in the market today is really any sector, and it's going to be market specific to a certain extent, where mortgage leverage, mortgage bank proceeds has been reduced, because Pace is there to fill the gap in the capital stack. And so if Comerica was out there lending 70% loan to cost on senior living deals 3 months ago, and now they're like, oh boy, let's dial that down to 60% loan to cost, there's now an immediate need to fill that void. And so that is a very easy spot for Pace to shift in and say, okay, we can fill that void for you. So it's going to kind of be, in my opinion, the flavor of the month on, you know, wherever the bank starts slowing down, that's where Pace starts speeding up.
Sonya, you particular types of asset classes that are impacted?
I can just say ditto to Rafi. Yeah. Definitely, but it is always every deal is a case by case, and we will entertain them and do our best to try to make them work. Nothing is off the table at the moment, outside of, which should be said, any kind of marijuana associated business is not on the table. But we will entertain pretty much any other asset class. And yes, we think it's a great time is spreading the word, guys, letting developers know that Pace exists, because the advance ratios from the commercial lenders, your traditional, let's just call it your senior debt capital has dropped. Another consideration for everyone here in the state of Michigan is that, as you probably know, Bali mentioned the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, MEDC, CRP, Commercial Revitalization Program. Their budget was significantly reduced last year. And so Pace is a very good alternative to help fill that gap that Michigan CRP used to cover. So just let you guys know that as well.
Excellent. We had one other question. How has the COVID economy impacted your work?
I think for us, Actually, 50% of our portfolio is made of hotels and that asset class. And obviously, the appetite is not as strong as it previously was, and that's especially because 50% of the portfolio is already consisting of that asset. However, we also recognize that doing retrofits right now is an opportunity because occupancy is low. The payment under the PACE program can be deferred potentially, at least the construction period and plus a year. So you may be looking at a 24-month period of time where you won't have debt service. So that gives us time to allow our country to find a vaccine for COVID.
Definitely.
Other than, please.
Rafi, have you seen any slowdown or any direct impact?
Yeah, I think it gets a little bit nuanced, I'd say, but certainly toward the beginning of the COVID slowdown, we had, call it 12 deals that were actively in some form of closing mode. And I'd say half of those, the mortgage lenders were banks, whether it was community banks or credit unions or regional banks. Those all marched forward to closing as if nothing was wrong in the world. The other half of them were primarily debt funds. And debt funds, candidly, have been hammered over the past 90 days. And they have all pretty much pressed the brakes and said, if we don't have to close this loan, we're not closing this loan right now. So we have quite a few deals that are just stalled because the mortgage lender has stalled, and they're the biggest piece of the capital stack. So at the same time, sort of we have, banks seem to be operating continuously and they're lowering leverage now, but they're still closing, which is great. Other forms of capital are certainly slower, but so that's the current portfolio that we're closing. Put that aside, now that everyone's kind of been slowing down a little bit, we've seen massive inflow of requests saying, hey, XYZ debt fund just bailed on my deal, can PACE step in to, again, fill the void? So we're fielding a ton of incoming calls during COVID, seeking alternative capital that people previously didn't look at.
I think we can echo that as well. And there's a little bit of a follow-up question of what have you seen in the PACE pipeline? Deals still moving to close? Certainly. I mean, we have a couple of projects that paused, particularly in Michigan, in looking at PACE. It's a wonderful loan program where you're taking out money for construction, and construction was shut down for a couple of months. And so very reasonably, we had a couple of deals that hit pause. Why borrow money now and pay interest on it when you can't actually deploy the funds and make the improvements? And so we've seen a slight slowdown in our pipeline. We have a couple of projects that have paused. We've been told for a longer term just to kind of see how the world plays out. They're not certain if the market is going to be there for the commercial space. But we're certainly seeing an uptick in calls into Lean and Green Michigan for retrofits. A little bit less on the new construction, less on gut rehab, which are the more intensive projects. A little bit more calls immediately on retrofits, where they're trying to find any way they can to squeeze money out and improve the assets that they're in. So I think it's a good question. Certainly we'll see a shifting, and I think we'll see it again over the next few months as things play out. Look, I've been doing PACE for 10 years. Things tend to ebb and flow. I'm sure we'll get back to it. There was one question on complexity, which mirrors kind of something that we had all discussed the other day in talking about this. How do you respond to people who think PACE is too complicated, too difficult, particularly for people who already have a particular way of financing upgrades and projects? It's kind of the common question we get of why should I use PACE? It's just too darn hard.
Well, from my perspective, having worked with so many other forms of gap money, if you will, new market tax credits, historic tax credits. This is nowhere near that level of complexity. And so I'd have to put it all in perspective. And then guys, I think, and for the audience, that I equate doing a PACE deal to getting a real estate tax abatement in the city of Detroit. When you're getting a tax abatement, you've got to do the same thing. You've got to apply for a district to be formed, but the developer goes into the city clerk's office with the appropriate documentation and requests the district to be formed. Then they have to go to city council and tell them why the district needs to be formed. If city council approves it, then they have to go back with an application for a certificate and go back to city council for the final approval. Well, guess what? We do all of that work for you. Rafi's team, they do it, we do it. It's that legwork does not have to be done by the developer. So the complication factor is removed when you look at it from that vantage point.
And I would echo a lot of that sentiment of, PACE sometimes looks very complicated at the beginning, particularly when you look at the Lean Green Michigan application, and there's a lot of moving parts to fill in and a lot of documents for requesting. But frankly, a lot of those documents are, potentially, if there's a senior lender involved in the project, you've already pulled them. We don't need a new appraisal if an appraisal's already been run. The property tax record, it's all there, and we're there to help you get through the process, as are Sonya and Rafi. So, complex, but not necessarily as complex as other types of money, and particularly in a capital stack with other sources of funds. The legwork has probably already been done. It's more pulling things together.
I think that's all true. I think the one caveat I'd say is that within the confines of the PACE Express program, which is really geared towards small balance PACE loans, you're probably much more likely to be looking at projects that may not have a mortgage loan on them, or you're dealing with potentially an owner of the property that is more sort of a sole proprietor that may not have a larger real estate portfolio, that isn't accustomed to very traditional real estate documentation. So in that case, they're going to see a stack of paperwork and they may be like, holy moly, what is all this? And it's really just kind of holding their hand through the process, saying like, it's not scary. This is just how you document a real estate loan.
Yeah.
But I think that just kind of comes with the territory of those smaller balance assets. And it's our job, as Sonya said, to really guide that process to make it so the owner doesn't get lost in the shuffle.
Excellent. Looks like we've got time for maybe one or two more questions, and I see a few more in the chat feature in the Q&A. One, how do you handle a loan that is both completed qualified improvements and future improvements? From a program standpoint, we look at it as just a blended project, and it really is going to come down to the time frame of the qualified, the completed qualified improvements. We tend to look back on like 36 months, mostly because per the state statute, the term of the PACE loan can go no longer than the blended useful life of the asset, or the measures that you put in. So the further you go back, the less time frame you have to amortize and make the project cash flow. And so that's really our main hinge point concern there. But Rafi, how about you? How do you handle the blended project?
In an asset like that, we do a lot of these. Basically, the work that has been completed to date, and again, they're going to depend on what your look back period is, whether it's 1, 2, or 3 years. That portion of the project, we basically view as a refund. So if it's a $2 million project and you spent $1 million over the past 3 years, and the next $1 million is to come, at closing, we effectively fund $1 million into your operating account. It's technically a reimbursement for costs expended. What you do with that money is completely up to you. You can put it back into the project, you can put it in your pocket, you can go buy another property. That's your cash. The other remaining $1 million, we will typically fund it into an escrow account at closing, which you will then draw down as you're incurring those future costs. So when you're putting down your contract or your deposit for your HVAC system or whatever improvement you're doing, then you'll say, hey, Rafi or Sonya, whoever your lender is, I'm ready for my next $250,000. Here's my invoice and my lien waiver.
Exact same thing for us.
Sonya, there was a question back of, I think I heard Ms. Delley mention that marijuana-related businesses are not the type of deal that her organization considers for potential projects. With medical, adult use, and industrial hemp markets emerging in Michigan, are those projects being considered? So I can tell you from a program standpoint, we're on board with our jurisdictions, and it is kind of a jurisdiction by jurisdiction basis for whether they would allow it. But it's a very complex area. Lenders have, and not just Sonya's, have obvious questions about it. It's legal on a state basis, but potentially not legal on a federal basis, and it makes it a little hard of an underwrite. And so Sonya, not to put you solely on the spot there, but nothing, not industrial hemp maybe? Can we get you to industrial hemp?
What? It hasn't been tested yet. Right now, maybe the door will open, but we have not been. It has not come to my attention that we are looking at any transaction in those less, innocuous sides of the marijuana business. Yeah. So unfortunately, I think generally speaking, it's just something that's going to take our country a while to really get used to. It's just still a bit soon for the financial industry to delve into that market. And I know it's very lucrative. It will probably be a burgeoning industry. And at some point in time, banks and other funders like PACE funders will get on board with the program.
And we agree with Sonya. There's too much intrastate law issues in play here on banking regulations.
Excellent. Well, it looks like we've come to our time. I want to thank both Sonya and Rafi for helping out today. I think, anybody in the audience with questions, I know there's a few still out there. I'll try to type some responses. So look for those in the Q&A or in the Zoom chat. But also, understand PACE has a lot of moving parts, even on the lending side, but hopefully it doesn't sound as complex as it may first appear. So thank you both for helping out today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Todd.
Thank you.
Finally.
Right. Sorry we couldn't get to all the questions, but I appreciate Todd typing responses in the chat box in the Q&A, because these are really good questions that were coming in. So we'll get to those. Moving right along. What we're going to do now is head out into breakout rooms. So what that means is we are going to hold these breakout rooms through Google Video Conference. And basically what that means is you just see in your chat 6 different breakout rooms. They're sort of like tables when you're stopping by a table at a conference. So pop in and out of these 6 Google breakout rooms, get to know the folks at these PACE lenders. They'll be explaining what they do, how they differentiate themselves, what they've been working on. We're going to do this for an hour. So come back here in an hour. You're able to keep Zoom open while also being in Google Video Conference. So just mute your Zoom and have as many discussions as you'd like over the next hour. We sent the links, so check the chat function for that. If anybody's having any problems with that, let me know. And I hope you enjoy the next hour getting to know some folks. All right, so it's 12:30 and we're gonna start back up. I know some people are still trickling in, but just to stay true to schedule, I'm happy to present the next panel, and actually I should pull this up on the slides. Here we go, our PACE and Economic Development panel discussion. So before I turn it over to the panelists, I'm just going to do a brief intro. What I'm going to do is speak for a couple of minutes, allow folks to introduce themselves on the panel, and then I have some questions that are sort of frequently asked questions that I'll put out to the panel, but also people should feel free to enter questions in either the chat box or the Q&A, and as moderator, I'll sort of grab them and shoot them out to the panelists. So, PACE is an economic development tool, and we try to work as closely as we can with the economic development agencies, local, statewide, et cetera. We're a free economic development tool. We don't charge the economic development agencies or local governments to provide the tool in the toolkit. And, we sort of just are PACE specialists, really, really good at one trick. What else do I have in my notes? Yep, but yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So our job is to take the PACE work off the plates of you folks, and really just make it as simple as possible. So for now, I'll just turn it over to folks and ask folks to describe their role in economic development and talk a little bit about themselves. So I guess we'll start with Paula and just head down this list.
Sounds good. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Paula Holtz, and I work for the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. I'm part of the Community Development Division. If you're familiar at all with the MEDC, we have the business development side, the Travel Michigan, and then also the community development side. And what we do is we work with local communities as well as developers with a myriad of technical assistance programs and real estate redevelopment tools, primarily designed for mixed use, downtown historic preservation type deals. That's sort of our sweet spot. But we've also recently, of course, pivoted to a lot of new programming that has to do with small business relief. So I've been at the MEDC for a couple of years, spent a couple of decades before that in local government. So happy to be here today.
You want me to just jump in then there, Bali? Hey everyone, Phil Santer with Ann Arbor Spark. Ann Arbor Spark is a public-private organization. We do economic development specifically in Washtenaw and Livingston counties. And we do a few different things under sort of our organization's banner. We're probably most well known for some of our early stage work. So we run a couple of business incubators, one in downtown Ann Arbor and one in downtown Ypsilanti, where we work with early stage companies that have high growth potential and sort of assist them with things to be able to kind of come over those major barriers. And then we have also something called the business development team, which is the team that I'm a part of. And we do more what I guess I would call traditional economic development work. So we work with Paul and her colleagues at the MEDC on opportunities related to businesses that are considering growing in our area or considering locating in Michigan or in our area to try and help them overcome or assist with whatever barriers they might have as they're trying to kind of take the next steps and grow their own business. And we are really, I think, responsible for trying to help coordinate a lot of the economic development toolbox that sort of Bali had mentioned in kind of the intro, in terms of saying, here's some things that you try and have to thread through as you're trying to do a growth type of project, and how can you utilize the tools that make the most sense for your project at any given moment. And that's just one component of what we work on. We also try and take on some different, what I would call like strategic projects. So things that we feel like are going to help sort of move the ball forward as it relates to sort of developing the overall economy in our backyard. I've been with the organization for about 8 years now. I was at the MEDC for a few years before that, and I'm pleased to be here. Mike, I think you might be up.
Thank you, Phil. I'm Mike Shesterkin. I'm the executive director at the SMSBF. We're an organization that promotes the idea that business is more than simply maximizing shareholder value, that business is really the way we organize our work. And we do that in Detroit and locally here in Southeast Michigan. So the SMSBF stands for the Southeast Michigan Sustainable Business Forum, and the key word there is forum. So in the ancient times, the forum was the center of the city, the polis, right? So the city and the outlying area, And that was where people exchanged ideas about how to advance and make their community better and more, I would say, equitable. Maybe that's a romanticized way of looking at it, but nevertheless, very area for the exchange of ideas. So that's what we do. We produce content that advances the idea that, as I said, business is more than maximizing shareholder value. It ought to create triple bottom line value, or people, planet, and profit. Another way of looking at it is to suggest that social, economic, and environmental justice are what the business ought to do. And of course, there's a very, for us, a very hyper-local viewpoint on that, you know, if you look at especially what's happened here with the pandemic and how it has exposed the weaknesses of the present system, that we really need to reorient ourselves at a local and state level, especially as it relates to policy that's going to advance a more diverse, resilient, and just economy in our state, and primarily here in Southeast Michigan. So a little bit about me. I've been involved with SMSBF for about 6 or 7 years now, primarily as a volunteer, now as the executive director. And prior to that, I spent about 30 years in the corporate world, actually working for large chemical process industries and that sort of thing. So that's kind of where my business background comes from. But in any case, real quick shout out to the folks at Lean and Green Michigan. You're doing a great job. Really appreciate being here. And thanks for inviting me to be on the panel.
Thank you for being on the panel. So again, questions, I'm monitoring the Q&A box, and I'm also monitoring the chat box, but I have a list of questions to start us off. So let's go. First question, what was your first interaction with the concept of PACE financing, and how have you seen it evolve over time?
I guess I'll go first. Not liking pregnant silences. So my first engagement with PACE was with Kyle Paczynski. I hope I didn't brutalize his name. I've got one of those long names that's difficult to pronounce too. But Kyle actually introduced me to PACE financing a number of years ago in a different role that I play. And I've looked at, I haven't done it recently, but I looked at the growth curve of the adoption of PACE financing and seen it just be, it's incredible how much it seems to have grown over the years. And I think rightly so. It just makes a tremendous amount of sense to businesses and developers and that sort of thing. And I think it's just a matter of getting the word out more, especially now, to see more of that growth.
You know, I was just going to add that, you know, a couple of years ago when I started at the MEDC, I think this was a pretty novel concept to many of us. I think maybe Bali had come to talk with one of our regional meetings, and it was not something that was very widely talked about and thought of in terms of capital stack. But I think it's really become quite a bit more of the common vernacular, where a lot of my development teams at least are aware of it, have considered it, might be pursuing it. And certainly our local communities and our regional economic development organizations they're spot on. I think people are really coming on board. So the fact that it's so much more commonplace and widely recognized is really heartening.
I think for me, specifically on PACE, it probably was whenever it was. So Christian and I had sat down whenever it was, maybe a couple years ago, I guess, at this point, to talk through kind of what the concept was all about, as kind of the overall awareness built around PACE specifically as a program. But I think for the certainly the idea of having financing tools available for energy efficiency or renewable energy projects, I was probably more familiar after the Recovery Act, I guess. So if you remember way back to the last Great Recession that we had, there was a lot of federal dollars that kind of came into play, and there was a lot of deployment. And at the time, I was working at the MEDC, and there was a significant focus on trying to do alternative energy projects, mostly from the development of those projects, from trying to be a solar panel manufacturer, capital of the world, or putting together wind turbines, et cetera. But on the same time, there was also a discussion around renewable portfolio standards for the utilities, so that they had to achieve a certain amount of percentage of their portfolio of energy from renewable sources. And their idea of having
making investments almost at the house level, right? So you could put on a solar panel onto your house and then actually sell that back to the utility, something that was done in other parts of the world and in other parts of the country, and trying to identify other financing tools in order to help assist with that. That was probably when, I guess if I had to go way back when, that would be the first part of the overall concept I was familiar with it.
Nice. Next question is, because of the current economic downturn, is less economic development money available from the state and from cities and counties? Are you seeing larger gaps in capital stacks? How are you seeing PACE being inserted into the conversation about these gaps in capital stacks and going forward?
You know, maybe I take a stab at that first. You know, certainly looking from the perspective of my lens, you know, there's a great deal of uncertainty, and moving forward, you know, we've made a really intentional pivot to look at some of our tools and find ways to assist in small business relief efforts through those tools that have typically been real estate redevelopment tools. And I think just looking at what our budget projections look like going forward, it's not great, right? So, you know, thinking through when we vet a project, for example, we have always looked at what other sources are included in the capital stack before we look at it to see how we could help fill a gap. That's always been the case, but I think moving forward, that will be even, there will be even more vetting to make sure a development team has exhausted every option there is out there prior to coming to us for an incentive. I will say that I have a really great example, and this was even pre-COVID, where I've got a hotel deal in Hillsdale, Michigan, a historic rehab of an 1880s hotel. Bali's given me the head nod. And, you know, that was a project that had been counting on his federal historic tax credits, and they were unable to attract an investor due to the size of the project and some changes in the tax law. And so where they had been counting on that in their capital stack and were unable to attract investment, they were then able to pivot, and PACE was able to come in and fill that gap for them. And we're still plugging along slowly but surely to move that project forward. So, I mean, a great example of how PACE was able to insert into that gap and fill it.
Maybe I can just add to that. I feel like we're still, oddly enough, although it feels like it's been forever in many ways, really early into this overall process, especially as it relates to sort of what are the reactions going to be from the economic development toolbox. Clearly, like Paula was mentioning, there's been a big focus and shift towards the small business support. There's been a couple funds that have been set up to just provide minimal amounts of dollars to really small businesses that were especially affected by COVID-19. And we as sort of regional economic development partners were sort of on point to try and help distribute those funds. And many of us also found ways to be able to create and develop sort of focused funds. Like we had a Washtenaw Small Business Fund to be able to develop and support small amounts of money to really small companies that were frankly a little bit outside of the norm for what most economic development organizations have been engaging with. So I think we're still early in that overall process. I think what strikes me is that given the economic downturn and sort of how tools are going to be able to react towards that, might actually be an opportunity in many ways for from PACE in particular. And I'll give you an example of that. The last, and I hate to keep on going back to 2008, but it's a good sort of parallel for where we're at now. But there were at least a couple of programs that were financing tools that were created as a result of that particular downturn. So the collateral support program and the business loan participation program, both of which MEDC continues to provide, were stood up as a result of sort of the technical deficiencies that companies had found themselves in because they had always paid on time, and all of a sudden their equipment that they had collateralized for their loans all of a sudden wasn't valuable to the bank anymore, and so they found themselves in these technical defaults. So those projects or those tools that came on board, in many ways, companies that had not thought that they needed to utilize a tool in the past sort of had to come to the table because of that. And I think there's an opportunity to try and present unique financing tools like PACE to companies that might have been a little bit outside of the realm of considering this, where they're just like, oh, I'll just do my traditional financing, it's fine, why do I have to kind of go through any sort of additional rigmarole that they already have to go through with banks. This might be a chance to bring new folks to the table. I think these are the kind of the moments when you're either going to identify and find companies that need the support, or they're more open to working through these different types of opportunities than perhaps they had been in the past. So I think there's going to be a chance here, and there's going to be shifts, and things are moving. I mean, even the budget was changing as of yesterday or this morning or whatever it was at the state level. So things are in quite a bit of flux, and I still anticipate personally that there's probably going to be some additional federal action, hopefully, that can be taken at some point, maybe after this month or later on in July. So things seem to be pretty fluid at the moment.
Phil, I love that optimism.
Yeah, I would just echo what Phil said, and I still personally think it's too early to tell what's going to happen. I mean, I'm far be it from an economist, but there's been so much liquidity pumped into the system, and the gaps that we see in state budgets and that sort of thing just are not, they're not exactly rosy pictures, right? So, but how does the system continue to work? It's a very early in this change point to figure out what's going to happen. But I would, as I said, echo what Phil had just said, that, we're going to look for unique ways to keep the thing going. And I think ultimately, as I said earlier, that our focus has to be at the state and local level, notwithstanding what the federal government puts into the system. But we really do have to start reclaiming the sense of destiny and power here at the state and local level to determine what's going to happen to our region. That's really where the focus ought to be.
All right, now I'm going to ask you guys to continue to look into the crystal ball. And so I guess this question is more, do you think that in the current economy and maybe over the next 12 months that folks are going to be focusing more on retrofitting existing buildings or focusing on gut rehabs, or what do you think will happen with new construction?
My preference is historic rehab. When I think of infill development, I'm not sure that from a community development standpoint, that's quite as competitive. And, I just have a sweet spot for reuse and rehab of historic buildings. So for me, that's where it's at, and that's where we should really focus our energies. But, again, that's sort of just, my background and passion. So I'll open it up to the others.
Well, I guess I would add, I mean, I think, I guess if it's a question of what should be focused on, I guess it's a matter of, kind of maybe following where the market is gonna kind of go. I think as I think through and even look in terms of some of the projects that we're working on at any given moment, there's kind of a variety of buckets, I guess, as I would put it. I think there's probably been less change in sort of the economic development pipeline than you might think, given what's happening with COVID. In particular, just to give you one data point, I mean, we sort of set out at the beginning of every year that, what are the, how many sort of projects that we want to try and pitch for. So these are like these big attraction projects that might come through that we either hear from the MEDC or from our partners at the Detroit Regional Partnership, or in through like the site selection networks that we're a part of. And we had anticipated sort of hitting a certain number for the entirety of the year. We've already gone through and I guess responded to 75% of what we thought we were going to for the entire year. So I think it just gives you a sense in terms of how active that market is right now, at least at that level. I think there's probably an argument to be made that that's a lot of, tire kicking projects where either they feel like they're slower in other parts of their world. So like, well, might as well just try and go and look around and do some site selection work. But on the other hand, they might be sort of vetted and validated projects. So all that to be said, I guess in addition to that, there's still projects that were underway before COVID that are still underway. So it doesn't seem like they've really pulled back from doing some of the work that they had expected. And that's the whole range of things, right? It's some rehab of some existing real estate that they were going to move into and do some work on and kind of make greater. There are some new construction that I think is still going to continue to move forward despite everything that is sort of going on. I get the sense though that there likely will be, if I had to do the kind of crystal ball perspective on that, I think rehab will become a greater part of the portfolio here, simply because existing buildings that you could pick up for presumably far less than you would have just a matter of months ago is going to be more attractive. And so we've seen that even from properties that I wouldn't consider brownfields, but are certainly not the best properties in our backyard, are getting more looks now than before. And they're saying, okay, they're actively asking the question for things like pace, like what can we try and bring to the table that will help us bring this up, put in some new lights to help us bring this up to speed of where it needs to go? Or are there things that we should be considering from an energy efficiency or energy generation standpoint that would help make this deal a little bit more attractive? So I say that it's an odd time in that obviously things are terrible in terms of the overall economy, but there's still pockets of activity, including new construction, but I would still put more focus on rehab if it were me. Yes.
Yeah, so I kind of build on what Paula ended with about her passion. So SMSBF is co-located at the Green Garage in Detroit Midtown, which is a sustainably rehabbed 1920s Model T showroom that uses about 10% of the energy and produces 10% of the waste that a building that size would use. So that sort of frames the reference, and it's beautifully done. I mean, the way they've reused materials, it's a gorgeous building on the inside. So that sort of shapes the perspective. The other bit there is that is part of the circular economy, and so you've got less energy impacts when you reuse material as much as possible. So that sort of thinking, I think, is definitely emergent, and it will remain at play. At least that's one of the things we're working on, is how to advance that circular economy. The interesting bit about that is not only does it save energy, toxic waste flows, water impacts, that sort of thing, but it puts people to work, and that's an important piece, right? The other part that comes as an observation that's come out of the pandemic is, and I have no idea, again, I think it's still too early to tell, but when you look at commercial real estate and office building space, there's been an awakening on the part, I think, of senior leadership at certain organizations that working from home is not such a bad thing, that people who can do that, have the capacity to do it, can be just as productive if they do it from home as if they got in the car, waited in traffic, and drove to an office space to collect together. So what that means for the existing space, it would seem to me, is it's either going to be repurposed or it's going to be rehabbed in a way that lowers the cost of having that building there. So that, if I had to read the tea leaves, would speak well to this idea of rehab of the existing built space.
Well, and just to piggyback on what Mike said, when the dust settles, I certainly would loathe to see some sort of a exodus from our urban centers or, vibrant downtowns that we've all worked so hard to invest in over the last few decades. And, so I hope that we continue to focus on filling those spaces in those existing buildings. Infill certainly has a place in a lot of our communities, but certainly want to make sure if there is a vacant space that we reuse that prior to looking to new construction. Again, personal passion.
There's a lot to be said for that, right? I mean, I have a daughter that lives in Detroit, and she's came over here yesterday and reflected on how nice it is to get out of her apartment, walk a few steps and go have a coffee, or walk a few steps and go to the market. So.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what your daughter's generation does differently from what we have done, correct? And what she's looking for in a lifestyle, and it's probably different from what we thought was the priority at one point.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I actually agree with everything you guys all said, although very different feelings on it, right? We have great building stock in Michigan, so why not use something that's already there and spruce it up? It's cheaper to do that, and it's better environmentally, right? But also I do see that there are some new construction projects that are completely still pressing on. I mean, some have slowed, and so it's interesting to see, and it's not uniform what I'm seeing. I'm seeing some things in certain asset classes are pressing on, and some are completely halted. So sort of hard to tell. I mean, like we closed 2 deals last week, and we might close another one, you know, in the next few days. But there are other projects in the pipeline that are just complete question marks now.
Yeah. And maybe I can just add, because I think I'm kind of brainstorming a couple of things that Paula and Mike had just been saying in terms of kind of the reuse component related to all this. And I think one of the, I don't know, trends it seems to be, which is that the COVID-19 crisis seems to be accelerating trends more than creating things that are brand new or something like that. And one of those had been taking a look at the types of uses that can be done from a redevelopment or from an infill type of project. And one of the moments that I've been thinking about before this was land use, and we're like, where's the housing stock in a location versus where is office or industrial or some other type of commercial use. I think clearly there's a need for more housing, for example. So I hope that maybe there's an opportunity to try and take a look at some of these places that might be underutilized, perhaps from an office perspective, and then rethink about how that could look from a redevelopment perspective into a different type of use. Obviously, there's some things that would have to change from a planning perspective, and you wouldn't want to do anything that would be, not make sense in the longer term. But from the extent that there could be places where, like you guys were suggesting, as a place where you can sort of live and have some commerce and then also work at some other location, there might be opportunities for that moving forward. So I guess it remains to be seen on how long that trend might change, or if that could become a reality.
All right, and so I guess last question, because we have a couple minutes left. So PACE can reimburse property owners for previous work that was completed via refinancing. Some people are calling this retroactive PACE. Some people are calling it rescue PACE because it's a way to inject money into folks' pockets now, and folks who need money. Do you think property owners are considering this, or you think they would take advantage of this? How do you think we can push that more?
Is that a 3-year look back? I understand. I mean, that's a sweetheart deal, right?
Yeah.
Seems like, looking at companies who might be seeing a cash flow crunch, it seems like a great opportunity. I think it's just a matter of getting the word out about it and continuing these conversations.
Yeah, I guess I would just add to that. I feel like a lot of it is just awareness, usually especially from the ultimate sort of end user of this. I mean, I think earlier in the discussion, Sonya was talking about how she feels like the process is less burdensome than trying to go and do like a property tax abatement through a city process, for example. And it's almost like after you've been through one, and I think Bali, you and I have talked about this in the past, right? It's like after you've been through one, then it becomes that much easier to be able to do, because there's less uncertainty in terms of what's going to be thrown at me related to some new thing that I might have to do that might feel outside of the norm. But once you're past that, then people are very comfortable in trying to go through that. And sometimes they feel like they're like, well, is this too good to be true, right? Like, I was saying, is this a sweetheart deal? Like, what am I not, like, what are going to be the pieces that I'm not thinking about, or where's going to be the gotcha at the end of it? And so sometimes you have to just try and do a little bit of a sales job in order to get people to understand and kind of think through, and no, and give them a little bit of comfort.
There's no catch.
Yeah, I would just echo what Phil just said, and it's a matter of, it's like this fear of the unknown, right? And it's getting past that and finding the person, whoever it is that needs to be, I'll just use the word sell, right? But that's what it comes down to, is how do you get the person who's, the key decision makers to take that step? How do you get them into a comfort zone? Because, ultimately something like that, especially in this point in the economy, is, it's a golden thing, right? So I think it's a matter of communication and how do you sell or market the idea and get the person to, take that first step.
Perfect. All right, we have 1 minute left. So any last words from the three of you?
I feel like we've come a long way in the conversations regarding PACE and its ability to assist in filling gaps. So glad to continue these conversations.
Yeah, I agree. I think the environment is very good for continuing the advance of PACE, and how that can fit into a future that we need to evolve, right? And come back to what are my beliefs that we talked about earlier in terms of the existing space and that sort of thing. So.
I agree.
Perfect. Way to take us home. All right. Thank you so much to our esteemed panel. And I'm going to keep us on time and move us right along. So next up, we're going to have a presentation on the Detroit Unity Temple PACE project. So I'll invite Chris to share his screen.
Thanks, Bali. Well, thanks, everyone. Chris Ellis here with Greenworks Lending, also with Bob Mattler with Green Portfolio Solutions, and Jason Beale of Wright Energy Partners. And we're going to jump into Detroit Unity Temple here. This was a project we did, I guess we closed it about a year ago, maybe a half a year ago. In Detroit, this was the first House of Worship deal in the Michigan program. We just have a note here from Eugene Franklin with the temple that said, their modest building upgrades will allow them to reduce their operating costs, reduce their energy usage, and increase their awareness of other saving opportunities, and really a win-win for us all. And again, I think this is the epitome of what PACE was here for, really to take an existing building while we love doing new construction and gut rehabs. I think to the panel's discussion earlier, just right before here, this was a great use of coming in where we were able to work together with Bob and Jason and really find a great solution for the temple. Bob, you want to jump in? I think you're muted, Bob.
How's that?
Perfect.
Sorry about that. Again, good afternoon. My name is Bob Mattler. I'm a project manager with Green Portfolio Solutions. We source, develop, and manage PACE projects here in Michigan and across the country. And it was really an honor to have the opportunity to work on this beautiful building. This came in as a referral from another church owner and church member, and we were able to talk to Eugene Franklin. He had just taken over the reins over at the board. And as you can see from the prior picture, this was a gorgeous building. It's a temple built in the 1950s. There was a additional addition put on in the 50s. But since that time, which is a long time ago, there really wasn't a lot of upgrading or even maintaining some of the infrastructure that was at the site. So we had the original boiler, we had the original edifice, the roof had been repaired many times. And it's a gorgeous two-story building, finished basement, almost 30,000 square foot, and kind of a pillar in the community there over in Palmer Park. So we were fortunate enough to talk to the board a few times, get in front of the members. And remember, this is a nonprofit, so it was a very unique concept to them trying to take on a property tax assessment. But we did work through all of those steps to get towards a PACE project. And we were able to help the Detroit Unity Temple receive $250,000. I think it's been mentioned before, that is the maximum amount that you can provide under a PACE Express program. And just a quick concept, we weren't able to do a larger project for a couple of reasons. And the main one being is you have to have valuation in the property in order to do 25%. So we were capped because of the valuation here. And also we didn't have the energy use that we normally have for other types of buildings. So those were some of the varying factors that kept us under the under the cap of $250,000. I also wanted to mention that Wright Energy Partners was a great partner. They'll be speaking next about what was really needed. So we really had to kind of pare down even though there were all these needs at the temple, what were the most important, most critical needs? And as you can see from this slide, there was a roof repair, lighting, insulation, building envelope improvements, and all those really helped with our utility savings in order to make this a cash flow positive. And as you recall, you do not need a cash flow positive project under PACE Express, but as you can see on the left side, energy savings are going to be $500,000 over the 20-year term. And it really was great to work with the board, the church members, and I'd be remiss with not saying that this was a first house of worship using PACE financing, which was great. And also this was the first PACE Express project in Wayne County. And obviously we hope to do many more, just not with nonprofits, but those buildings and businesses that might be in need in cash. We just spoke about the refinancing that's out there. But certainly a great project, looking forward to the opportunity to do more. And all the partners were great to work with. Chris will talk a little bit more about Greenworks Lending. And I'm going to hand it over to Jason Beale right now of Right Energy. And thanks again.
Thank you, Bob. So I want to echo that. It was great to work with Greenworks and awesome to work with Bob as well on this project. So a little bit about us. Right Energy Partners, we're a trade ally with the local energy companies, DTE and Consumers, and several other ones throughout the region. And so we've got several different projects that we've done over the years. Guernsey Farms, McClure's Pickles. We were elected to the MECA Energy Efficiency Contractor of the Year, 300 plus projects, energy efficiency projects. We've done several more, but energy efficiency projects since 2014. Michigan Saves approved contractor and PACE approved project contractor. And so really what we've tried to organize the organization to do is to be able to be an energy efficiency GC, so that we're able to provide, instead of a client having to go out and find a HVAC subcontractor, a lighting, contractor, building envelope, roofing, all of those different contractors, and try to put all that together. We provide that all in-house with all of our contractors under contract with us to be able to provide that type of one-stop shop ability to work with them. And so we've partnered up with Bob's organization to be able to make a lot of these projects come to fruition, because he's been able to be instrumental in getting them the financing necessary to make these projects a reality. For Detroit Unity Temple, we looked at, as it kind of was described before, the LED lighting, new interior and exterior lighting, roof repair, because as you saw, it's a beautiful limestone building. They were having issues with leaking inside the building, so we had to look at repairing and the roof aspects, and then the building envelope. So real quick, in a PACE project, as it Bob had stated, a lot of times you need it to be cash flow positive, and this project was. But sometimes in a PACE project, stuff like the roof doesn't necessarily provide a whole lot of energy savings. It does, but it doesn't really help carry itself. That's why we incorporate so much into it. And that's why you see in a lot of PACE projects, the lighting and the building envelope, because that really helps carry the project. And so as you see in the building envelope, we're able to take them from R2 to R40, which dramatically helped with the energy savings. So this is the main sanctuary before. As you see, kind of some of the lighting there, the downstairs area. And after, we were able to dramatically reduce the energy output, but the lighting, the photos really don't even do it justice as to how much brighter it is in their main sanctuary, and also down in their kind of fellowship hall. So the lighting was able to be dramatically improved. The bills dramatically dropped. On the roofing side, as you can see, a lot of issues on top of the roof as to what led to a lot of the leaking. And so we were able to kind of go in and do a coping on the side of the of this limestone, which is where a lot of the leaking was going into. As you see, that area was able to do all new patchwork, and we were able to address some of the issues that they've had. On the building envelope, this is what the insulation looked like in their below the roof, but above the attic area. And as you can see, some foundational issues, which is where all of the air gaps were getting into the property. Again, as you see now, that same area, we're able to cover it with a cellulose insulation that took it from an R2 to R40. And on the building envelope side and then the insulation, as you see, we're able to patch up those areas and seal it. So now that under soffit areas, there no longer is that outside air coming in and presenting problems. So overall, the savings, using the figuring in the 2% inflation, the LED side of it was over 432,000 of the savings. As it is for most projects, the LED does tend to carry most of the savings. All the roof leaks were stopped, and again, that was paid for by the other measures. And in the building envelope, over 90,000 in savings. So again, it helped pay for itself over the time period as well.
Great, thanks, Jason. I think we covered a lot of this already earlier, but again, some of those benefits of PACE that we were able to utilize here, and on the other projects. I don't need to go through this entire list here, but we were able to provide them with that $250,000 of financing that really went towards, and when you factor in the $500,000 savings, the payback period was, it was pretty great. Just information here on PACE in general with, $200 billion of being spent a year on utilities. About 30% of that, is really going to waste, and we're able to step in and provide long-term financing when you're typically getting that construction finance or commercial loan financing, 3 to 5 years, maybe 7-10 years. We're able to go out to a max of 25 years and really showing a great, savings to the bottom line in terms of cash flow, with it being that tax assessment. Here in Wayne County, we were able to get this done. This is one that joined the statewide program in late 2013. And we've been happy to be a part of this project, working with both Bob and Jason, and hope to be able to do many more. With that, I'm not sure, we've got a few minutes left here. Bali, I'm not sure if we've got any questions flowing through. But here's Bob, Jason, and my contact information. We're happy to work with any of you guys, or discuss your projects you may have on board that we can help you with, whether it's nonprofit churches or anything else.
All right, I don't see any questions, and we're just about at time anyway. So I'm gonna share my screen and push us along. All right, so here we are. And now we are moving along in the agenda, and we're gonna head over to Lucas at PlugSmart, who will talk a bit about PACE at Nonprofit Center project that he worked on.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
All right. I have requested to share. Is it showing up, everybody?
It's on the screen.
Great. All right. We're going to talk about the Blue Water YMCA and how PACE helped them solve a roofing and a domestic hot water boiler issue. PlugSmart, we are a design build energy services company working here in the Midwest and Southeast. PACE is one of the tools in our toolkit to help building owners solve problems. I like to say we are all, if you're involved in the PACE marketplace, you are a problem solver by nature. You want to bring creative solutions to deals. We think of ourselves as problem solvers in the energy efficiency space. We're energy geeks, but we're also building geeks. And I think you've heard that everybody on this session today talking about how we all take a lot of pride in bringing buildings back or improving buildings to take care of our built environment. So why PACE for not-for-profits? And we have thought about this when we're out selling to the not-for-profit marketplace. What is it that really solves a problem for not-for-profits? And PACE doesn't work for every deal, doesn't work for every owner. And I think everybody has said that it's a case-by-case basis, but there are some generalities that apply. And we think for not-for-profits, the 100% financing is a big deal. Not-for-profits by nature don't have a lot of working capital just sitting around that isn't going to their core mission. There's also no guarantee required outside of the building. Now this is, we approach this with caution because a lot of times the buildings that these not-for-profits are in are a really important part of the institution. So it's not taking it lightly, but it is important to note that that piece of property in this loan is not backed up by the entire organization. So worst case, everything goes to hell in a handbasket. They could walk away from that property and the organization still could continue. It's a fixed rate long-term product. It's a product that we believe would be hard for this asset class and these borrowers to get for this type of work. So it really is providing a not only part of a capital stack in a renovation deal or a large construction project, but really for this asset class, it may be the longest fixed rate loan that they could get. There's enough flexibility in the usage of funds in PACE that they can solve a lot of different types of problems. We'll talk about that with Blue Water YMCA in a moment. And then there's a performance guarantee, which is important for often the boards that run these organizations. They're risk adverse by nature in our experience, and having a performance guarantee is helpful to allow them to make the decision to invest in their property. So when we're talking to not-for-profits, what type of questions are we doing? I think that we're all in the business to do deals and uncover deals that can work. So we're asking tough questions up front. Building ownership, you've got to have not-for-profits that are owning that building and have enough equity to make the deal work. So that's a big one. They either need to be growing and have a good reason to expand into new space or change the space type or have deferred maintenance. PACE needs to be there to solve a problem. They need to have enough square footage and energy usage to overcome the costs of doing the PACE deal. Now with PACE Express, Lean and Green Michigan, to their credit, have really tried to minimize and take out those costs, and they've done a really good job doing so. But it's likely not the project or the process to do $10,000 to $15,000 worth of investment. It's got to be a big enough problem to solve. And then organization history, right? There are plenty of not-for-profits that have been around for a long time and have a history, and we wouldn't want to do a deal with that was so risky or with such a new organization that this amount of debt that they put on this property could really have a negative potential to sink that entire organization. So I think when we're looking at projects, we want to go and look and target well-established not-for-profits that can use this as a tool as they look for the next 20 years out at their real estate assets and how they're going to use those to serve their core mission. So some of the types of properties that have done PACE deals would be good candidates and have definable real estate assets. So Red Cross buildings, YMCAs, great candidate. We're seeing a lot of uptick in YMCAs, not just at the Blue Water YMCA. Arts groups, Ronald McDonald houses, large foundations, not-for-profit schools with a long history, community institutions, Salvation Armies, Volunteers for America, things that have been around, have the length of time in their property to have built some equity if their owner is property, and the potential need. We've also, they're also not for profits, but kind of different private clubs. We've seen the golf course or other private club market really have some good traction in the last 6 to 18 months. We've done several deals in that niche as well. So there's definitely a lot of not-for-profit owners out there that can use this funding source. So what did Blue Water YMCA need to do? So they had a building that had a roofing failure over their pool. That's what you're looking at in the space here. And the roof was leaking and staining the underside. So you go into this beautiful pool area, and this is a beautiful YMCA. You can see it's right on the river. It's great building. And they had these ugly stains, and we're getting leaking into their pool room. So they needed a new roof. They also need to repaint that ceiling. And they needed a domestic water boiler. That boiler had failed, so they were down to one boiler, no redundancy to heat all of the waters for the showers. That's not a good spot to be in. They had opportunities to fund that work because they had inefficient lighting, and they had a building automation system, but it was not doing everything that it could for them. And therefore they had a high cost per square footage compared to other like athletic centers. So there was enough energy savings potential that they could fund the roofing and the boiler, which are long payback items, with the lighting in the building automation project. We'll get into that a little bit. But just like the previous presenter said, you gotta have the need, the long payback facilities challenge, and then you gotta have the opportunity, the energy savings method to pay for. So this is a project menu, and this is how PlugSmart presents every deal we do, with lots of options. So running through all the different spaces they could upgrade LEDs, all of the different options. You'll see we did the work and then disqualified a number of different measures, as well as we kind of went through the sales process and worked with the customer to understand what amount they would be comfortable borrowing, what they wanted to get done, what were the key things. For this deal, it was the roof upgrade, see item number 7, and the domestic hot water heaters 4B. Those were the 2 key things. And then it was about pairing enough energy savings through the rest of the project to fund those. And just giving some examples here of how we run this through. And this is basically our audit deliverable. So if you're a customer looking to do a PACE project and get an energy audit done, what can I expect out of this? And this is very similar to any PACE energy auditor or developer. You'll get a similar type deliverable where each energy conservation measure should be broken down. You should see the energy savings. You should see a rebate value. You should see how much energy savings is being attributed to operations and maintenance savings. And then you get these simple paybacks. And that's simply the cost of the investment measure less the rebate divided by the utility plus the O&M savings. Obviously, you need to include interest costs to get your true payback and meet the Green Michigan requirements. But at this point we're doing our analysis, we just use simple payback and then include the interest costs at the end. Things like lighting models. This is something you could have your vendor do so you can see where your foot candles will improve in your building. Controls retro commissioning, we broke out what we were going to do, and we utilized the local control service provider at this facility. That's one of the great things about PACE, is that owners can have a lot of flexibility on who they use to do their projects. So the Blue Water YMCA had a trusted controls contractor and HVAC provider that had their service agreement. We wanted to use them because they were going to keep servicing that building. We wanted them involved in the project because this is a long-term financing, 20 years. You need those savings to be permanent. And to do that, you need your service providers They're going to take care of that building for the long term, involved and invested in the project. Just some of the other ECMs. I'm not going to go through each one of these for time's sake, but I will skip ahead to a couple. One of the unique things we did, we were able to work with the Michigan, I guess it's health department, and turn down, get a letter to allow the YMCA to turn down the number of, basically the flow in their water treatment when the pool was unoccupied. That was a nice energy savings and chemical treatment savings. We didn't actually count that in their savings because it's hard for us to predict, but they could add VFDs, which gave them the benefit of basically soft starts on these large motors, and were able to slow down, get a letter from the state to allow them to slow down that the amount of water they were pumping when the pool was unoccupied. What else? Cool stuff. You can certainly do solar. We did not do a solar project in this certain project, but you can certainly include solar in a PACE project, and we're seeing more of that across the marketplace. And another unique thing is we looked at a microturbine potential here on this project as well. We didn't vet out for their certain application, but there are certainly unique things that you can fit into a PACE project. You just got to work with Lean Green Michigan, get it okayed before you go too far down that hole. I am open for questions. I will look for questions myself. I think Bali has stepped away.
Yeah, I'm still here. I just turned off my video. Start the show. All right, well, we have about 3 minutes, so if folks want to chip in with questions, I mean, we can just talk about the project for a couple of minutes if you like.
Yeah.
I agree with your assessment. I mean, you did really important work, and the property owner really needed it. And it is a beautiful, beautiful property on a great piece of land overlooking the water. It's like definitely the YMCA I would choose if I were, within a 30-minute drive.
It's a really cool, it's a really cool piece of story. That's a community institution. Like you can just feel it when you walk in. There's a daycare at that property. They provide important childcare services. Sitting in the space for while the project was going on, we had a really crazy tight time window on this project. They had a week scheduled maintenance time where they shut the pool down. We had to extend that in 2 weeks. We had to let them get started on the roof, drain the pool, then bring 3 man lifts into the pool, put them on the pool deck to allow the painting of that ceiling, and then get everything back out, let them fix the tile and everything that needed done as part of their general maintenance, and get the pool figured back out. It was got it done in 2 weeks. But sitting in that space, they've got senior citizens doing pickleball. They've got the place is just alive all the time. There's some intense pickleball action up in the Blue Water area. Let me tell you that.
Amazing. And I did see a question pop in. So PACE auditors help the building owners calculate all the savings. How do you initiate a project like this? Does the owner have control over the vendors used?
Yeah, so how it worked with Blue Water YMCA. So they knew they had a roofing problem. They've had it for several years. They just didn't have a way to fund it. So somehow I don't, through either you, Bali, and Lean Green Michigan, or somehow we got involved. PACE got introduced to their facilities person. We got interviewed. I think they're talking to a couple different firms. We got interviewed, and they had some of this project already figured out. They had a roofer that they wanted to use. They had a mechanical service provider, like we talked about, that they wanted to stay with the project. They knew who they wanted to buy their boiler from. So what they needed is they needed a general contractor and an energy auditor and an energy engineering firm to put this project all together and get it done, get it financed, and then get it implemented. They chose us. We were lucky enough to be selected to do that. We certainly worked with them and utilized all of their vendors that they wanted to use. So there's absolutely room for customers to have influence there, use who they know, like, and trust in a PACE project.
Cool. All right. So yeah, just to reiterate the answers to these questions, PACE auditors are people who definitely can calculate savings. How to initiate it, just reach out to anybody really who's presented, or reach out to us, and any of us can make connections, and the owner definitely has control over the vendors used. And now I'm going to share my screen again because we're going to go into another round of breakout rooms. So we're going to do contractor breakout rooms. All right. So we are in the home stretch now. And now I'm going to pass the baton over to Jen and let her share her screen. Awesome.
All right, hello everyone. Hopefully you don't have a Zoom fatigue. We're almost there. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the case for high performing buildings and how they really do offer a path to carbon neutrality. And I'm an architect. I've been practicing for nearly 40 years and been doing sustainable education and design all during that time. And right now, I'm also leadership chair for the Ann Arbor 2030 district. There are 22 established districts across North America. There are 3 in Michigan. There's one in Grand Rapids, Detroit, and Ann Arbor. And currently we have membership that consists of property owners, managers, and tenants, folks that do professional services, and community organizations such as the City of Ann Arbor Area Transportation Authority, et cetera. And really what we're doing is trying to support property owners and managers in transforming their buildings into high-performing facilities to meet carbon neutrality goals. The challenge that we put forth comes from Architecture 2030, which calls for a progressive reduction in energy consumption, water consumption, and transportation emissions in buildings, all the way to 2030 with a 50% reduction. And that was based on the original Paris climate goals. Well, since then, it's been a while, we sort of need to pick up this pace. So what we're hoping is that in 2020, we really peak in our CO2 emissions globally. And you can see by this trajectory, we really need to kind of target a 65% reduction in our energy and water. In Ann Arbor, recently, the City of Ann Arbor City Council passed a carbon neutrality plan, and it was based on looking at an emissions snapshot of the city, which really shows that the University of Michigan owns about 1/3 of the emissions, the community emissions. And if you look at the commercial industrial buildings, it's another 22%. And if you tag on some transportation, you're easily at 40% of the emissions. So to get to carbon neutrality, we really need a plan. And the plan that was adopted just June 1st of this year, unanimously by the City Council. We're a strategic partner in that, and specifically we're supporting energy efficiency in buildings, benchmarking and developing an ordinance and how to enforce that ordinance, supporting vehicle and building electrification, because if you're going to be carbon neutral, you need to eliminate the use of fossil fuels. and also support the non-motorized transportation plan, which includes reducing vehicle miles traveled by 50%. And following me, Missy Stults from the City of Ann Arbor will be talking a little bit more specifically about this plan. So how do we get there? And especially in the built environment. And there are really three different segments that we look at to achieve zero. One is new construction. And the goal there is to design and build zero net carbon buildings. And then also looking at existing buildings and how do we do energy upgrades within those existing structures. And then as you reach high performing buildings, embodied carbon really starts being a part of the equation. And then the strategies, obviously with new buildings, you want net zero or very energy efficient construction. You want carbon-free renewable energy and zero on-site emissions, which means getting rid of fossil fuels. Then the other strategy is looking at large buildings and small buildings differently, because what they're able to accomplish economically may be a little different. So one of the key strategies is one, we talked about designing energy efficient buildings. All right, so you want to comply with the International Energy Conservation Code 2021 or better, which is really based on ASHRAE 91 2019. Our current ASHRAE energy code in Michigan is based on 2013. So this is probably about 20% more efficient. So then the second thing is establish the renewable energy on site that you can achieve. And three, integrate that amount of on-site renewable, and then if necessary, procure off-site renewable energy. So that's kind of the basic formula. This is what it looks like. So let's say a typical office building has a total energy per square foot baseline of about 105 kBTUs per square foot per year. And the goal is to make that building energy waste reduction, energy efficiency measures, so it complies with ASHRAE 90.1 2019. And then add your on-site renewables and procure off-site renewables until you get to this zero net carbon. All right, so what are some existing building strategies? Well, one, you got to figure out where you are. So that's called benchmarking. And the 2030 districts do that for our building partners at no cost. Next is, well, if I'm at a certain consumption level, an energy audit can give you a real good path to energy conservation measures. As so can retro commissioning, where you go and you take a look at your HVAC systems and see if they are actually functioning as designed, and if there's some strategies for reducing energy. Then developing a building efficiency plan to get down to your target goals of 65% reduction by 2030. And then couple that with an energy transition plan. So if you have currently a gas-fired boiler or gas-fired furnace, you want to transition to a heat pump, a VRF system, something like that. And looking at evaluating your on-site renewables and possibly enrolling in the Michigan Green Power or some other off-site renewable. This is an example of a building that actually used PACE financing to do a substantial renovation. They updated all of their HVAC. And you can see that for this size office building, the baseline is just over 90 kBTUs per square foot. They are down to 64.4 after that renovation. So they are close to meeting their 2025 target. And they have an energy transition plan in place and are doing some other energy efficiency upgrades. The 2030 district has an energy audit program at this point, and we provide a free energy audit for 14,000 square feet of an office or retail building. And you have to be within the city limits of Ann Arbor and join the 2030 district and provide 13 months of energy data. And we're almost to the point, we've done almost 20 audits, and our goal is to get 40 of them done. Another member building that did a deep green renovation of an 1880s schoolhouse for their office, they completely re-insulated the envelope, put in new windows, added different types of solar PV, and the HVAC system that they chose was a geo-exchange system. They have an EUI of 12.2. Remember, you know, typical large office, a small office building might be up in 90. So they've done an extraordinary job. They're almost to net zero, and that includes their car EV chargers. So they're really doing an exceptional job on that. Another member building was actually, it's this inline Main Street building. It had a tree growing up through the center of it. It was kind of a derelict structure. So they did a deep green renovation and converted it to an all-electric building. So they do actually cold climate heat pumps and LED lighting. It's not totally occupied. We just did an energy audit. And one of the things they didn't do is disconnect their gas meters. So they're paying like 40 bucks a month for nothing. The other thing that they're doing is they're adding an ERV to improve their air quality in the building. So it'll be interesting once it gets fully occupied to be able to benchmark that building. The other thing that the district has been doing, on-site renewables, and members this year have added 134 kilowatts of solar PV. So we continue to work with nonprofits. We've partnered with the Michigan Interfaith Power and Light program to have, and we have documents for PPAs so that entities can create, well, the LLCs are created, the PPAs take advantage of the tax credit for the solar that the nonprofits can't. So the other thing that we realized is we really did not have a multifamily program in Ann Arbor. Multifamily buildings make up the largest percentage of square footage. Not surprising because it is a college town. And so we decided to go after partner with two entities. One was a sorority and the other one is Oxford Companies, which probably has the largest multifamily portfolio in the city. And we started with them and we're doing energy audits. The Oxford Companies energy audit, we have two of their buildings, and really what we're doing is we're also, as we're doing the energy audit, we're training their maintenance technicians to go in and tighten up and do their own little mini audit as they turn over units. They turn over 200 units every summer. So you can make a lot of progress that way. We're pairing this with some green cleaning and composting recycling education with the sort of tenant engagement, and then doing energy and water benchmarking and see how well we do. New buildings, Viridian at County Farm Park is a planned living challenge community, and they are a member. And right now we're putting together a team to go after a DOE grant that would actually create a very smart microgrid among a mixed use and look at how you can more efficiently use solar PV in a community like this. All right, so going back to how do we achieve zero? New construction, zero net carbon buildings, existing buildings, you do that energy upgrade, and then you get to embodied carbon. And embodied carbon really refers to all the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the manufacturing, maintenance, and decommissioning of a structure. So what happens is typically embodied energy may not be much of a, it might be, 10, 11% of operational energy for a typical building. But once you have a high performing building, embodied energy becomes a much larger piece of the pie. And so it's really important to look at that. And so there is a 2030 challenge for embodied carbon, which gets down to 0 embodied carbon emissions by 2040. And that's really going to change the materials we use and how those materials are manufactured. What the 2030 district is doing is targeting the building envelope first, which is responsible for about 55% of the carbon footprint. And we're going to look at concrete and we're going to look at steel in our specific area and come up with a spec for different strengths of concrete that reduce the embodied carbon in the concrete, which is primarily the Portland cement, and also look at what the maximum recycled steel content we can get. So, hey, 2030 districts are making a difference, and we're really forging that path to high performing buildings, carbon neutral buildings. And this is a link that's really helpful for case studies, additional case studies for high performing buildings. So I hope that you'll join us. And I wanted to give contact information for both myself and Connie Lilly, who's the executive director for the 2030 districts in Detroit. So I will stop now and see if there's some questions that people might have.
Looks like David Schreiber would like you to put back up the link. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to take back over the sharing and I'm going to pass it over. You can enter whatever into chat whenever you'd like.
Okay, great.
To keep the schedule going, I am going to pass the mic to Missy and she can share her screen.
Gotcha. All right. Don't look at my calendar. No one look at that. It's terrifying.
Thanks for being here.
Doing all right?
Perfect.
All right, Bali. Well, I want to say a special thank you to Bali and to Christian for opening up an opportunity to come and talk to you all today. I know I am the closing batter on this and I got to hit a home run because you guys have had a great day. So I doubt I'm going to do that, but I'm going to talk really fast to try to get you out on time. So it is my great pleasure to be here. My name is Missy Stults. I'm the head of the Office of Sustainability and Innovations in the city of Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about our carbon neutrality plan, which is called A20. So contextualize, Jan set us up really nicely. We do greenhouse gas inventories. We're talking about 2.1 million metric tons as an entire community that we have to get to zero in the next 10 years and 5 months. So we have to be effectively sprinting and we need a lot of partners to do that. And to put 2.1 million metric tons into context, this is what we're talking about, right? We're talking about 5 billion miles driven. We're talking about 2 billion pounds of coal burned. Like that is what the Ann Arbor community has contributed year over year in terms of our emissions profile. So it's a significant task for sure. And that 2.1 million metric tons is the entire community, right? It's not the city of Ann Arbor, it's not the University of Michigan, it's not our residents, it's everybody, including people that come into our community. So as we went through this work, there's a long backstory of how we got here. And again, I want to leave some time for some questions, so I'm not going to dive into that in richness. I'm happy to share offline with anyone. But basically what happened, council declared a climate emergency, said we want to be carbon neutral by 2030. This was in November. And they said, and you have until the end of March to create a plan for how we're going to actually become carbon neutral. And if anyone wants to do some quick math, I will tell you right now, that was 82 working days that we had to go from basically nothing to where we are today. And the very first thing we did is we said we have to have values. We have to articulate what it is that's going to guide this work because we don't have time to guess what those values are. And so the values guiding our work, and these continue to be the values of our office. They've always been the values of our office, are equity, sustainability, and transformation. And what you see in the bullet points are the characteristics that we used in the planning process and that we continue to use now to implement the actual plan. I'm going to just spend a minute on the middle. I'm sorry, not on the middle, on the ends. Equity has to be the pinnacle of this work for us. I see no other path. The reality is that climate change disproportionately burdens our Black and Brown and Indigenous brothers and sisters and neighbors, and we need to own that. And solutions to it should not be on the backs of those communities. In fact, solutions should prioritize those communities and those voices, and they should be at the table designing solutions with us. And that is authentic and that is real. And so for us, that is a really important value that we bring throughout the arc of our work. On the other side, I want to talk to you about transformation. And this value is something that I hold really, really dear in my heart. And the basic premise is the status quo of where we're headed is not okay. Whether that's in terms of climate impacts and what the models are telling us, or whether that's growing economic disparity, or whether that's growing racial inequality within our society, I don't think any of us are super excited about that future. And honestly, I don't think any of you are, because you wouldn't be on this discussion if you were excited about that future. And so we have two choices. We can be complicit and just say, well, that sucks, but I'm not going to do anything different. Or we change that future because we challenge it. And so we want a transformed future because I don't want that status quo future that we're moving towards. So transformation has to be a part of the work that we're doing if we're serious about meeting our goals and our objectives. So that said, we have these values that guide us and we have this vision. And the vision for our work is that together, everybody kind of coming together, we're creating and implementing a just transition to community-wide carbon neutrality by 2030. I have lots of slides, and if you've ever heard me talk, I'll talk a lot about the planning process that we went through in those 82 days. But basically where we got, the end of March, it was adopted in June, we created this plan. But we didn't just create this plan, we have it, and I'll tell you a little bit about it in a second. We also have a governance framework that talks about how the plan is living. It's a word that I think people find really aggravating when we say the plan is living. I can tell you the plan is wrong. The instant it was published, it was outdated. Technology is changing very fast. Partners ebb and flow in this work. And so the plan is directional. It is not verbatim what we're going to do. And so the governance framework talks about how we keep that plan living, who's responsible for shepherding the plan forward, who the decision makers are, what we're going to do to get community feedback, what really are the decision points where things will shift and change. And so it's really meant to be transparent so people understand how to continue engaging in the plan itself, but far more than that in the implementation of the plan. We also have a prioritization framework. You'll see in a second, there are 44 actions and 7 overarching strategies that are in our plan. The strategies are pretty strong. They're kind of the foundation that everything's built on. So they're not gonna change. But what are the actions? Those 44 actions are going to change over time. But we had to have a rigorous way of evaluating what's in and what's out. And so the prioritization framework is what we use to evaluate the actions, and the 44 top actions are the things you see in our plan. But every other idea that comes forward, it has to go through that same level of rigor. And so the prioritization framework is that rigor that other ideas have to be evaluated against to make it into a revised plan. And then of course we got to pay for it. So we worked on an investment scenario. You will notice that this is not a cost scenario because the vast majority of things in this plan are fundamentally investments. They're investments in our people. They're investments in our place. Many of them have paybacks. Others are avoiding costs. And so framing this as a cost is completely missing the narrative. At least that's what I would argue. So in my last few moments, I'm going to tell you what's inbounds, and I'm going to focus only on the strategies. These again are those like pillars or the foundation that really holds the whole plan together. These are fairly unwavering. We are going to power our electrical grid with 100% renewable energy, period, full stop. We are going to switch our appliances and our vehicles from alternative sources to electric, full stop. We are going to significantly improve the energy efficiency of all of our infrastructure. We all are living in spaces right now. We're spending more time in our homes than we did before, and we can acknowledge that they're more comfortable when they're more efficient, and that we spend a whole lot of money to heat and cool the outdoors. That is not effective. So we need to enhance efficiency. What is different is all 3 of these actually need to start happening in parallel. With 10.5 years and 120-some thousand people we need to work with, we can't do these piecemeal. We have to find ways to package this work together. We have to reduce the miles we travel by at least 50%, and we need to be displacing those other miles with electric vehicles or an electric transit. So this is about land use. This is about making sure we have walkable communities, we have accoutrements that we want to get to, that we have sidewalks and bike lanes that feel safe, that actually lead us to places we want to go. And it's also about massively expanding our transportation system. And Arbor is a community of, as I mentioned, about 120,000 people. Pre-COVID on a workday, 83,000 commuters come into this city. That is a lot of people. So we cannot just solve the problem by thinking about the bubble of Ann Arbor. We have to think about the regionalization of our economy and how people move, whether that's to come to school or to work or to recreate in our community. this is fundamentally about a circular economy. We framed it as reshaping our relationship with the things that we buy and that we use that are kind of all around us, putting them into useful life and acknowledging they don't just go to a landfill where they die, right? There's still utility in them for people, and we have to create the systems to be able to extract that utility and put it back into use. Those first 5 are really about kind of more traditional climate mitigation, but climate change is already here. We're already experiencing the impacts. And so we have to acknowledge that and invest in the resilience of our people and our place and our sense of place. And so our 6th strategy really focuses on enhancing the resilience. And I don't mean resilience as in bouncing back from some sort of disaster. I mean resilience as in bouncing forward. And I'm happy to talk about that. I geek out a lot over resilience. It's what my PhD is in. So I think a lot about that topic and how we really center people in that conversation. And then the 7th we call as our kind of cheat. It's other, but it includes things that don't belong in any category because they belong in every category. So this is things like our equity work, or we run a grant program where people can get up to $10,000 to do something in the public space related to sustainability. So that falls in this category, as well as carbon offsets. So here are the 44 actions that are in the plan. As I mentioned before, these are far more malleable than those 7 strategies, which are pretty immovable. This is what prioritized through the public engagement process that we went through, 3 public surveys, 68 public events, 67 partner organizations, a lot of input into this process. And the ones highlighted in red are the ones we're working on now, or that are prioritized for the next fiscal year for us, which starts July 1st. So just a hot minute away from where we are right now. You'll notice it expands a lot of things. I will tell you we are an office of 5. We will be an office of 6 at one point. We are the largest sustainability office in Michigan, and we are far under-resourced for the challenge at hand. This is the last slide I want to leave you with, which is, if anyone has heard about our plan, the very first piece of press that we got was Ann Arbor's $1 billion climate plan, because we estimate that it'll cost about $1 billion to do this. That's not all new money, first of all. And second, it completely disregards the fact that we have a social cost of carbon that we are already paying, that society is already paying due to the natural disasters that are occurring, or the disinvestment in people, or the people that we're leaving behind who aren't contributing to our economy right now. And so we ran a quick calculation just over the last 18 years. This was that first graphic I showed you, where we started doing our inventory in 2000 up to 2018. And if you do everything under the curve and you put a $55 a ton cost of carbon on that, which is actually fairly low according to the literature, but it's about kind of in the median of what the literature talks about. Ann Arbor over 18 years is responsible for $2.3 billion in terms of social costs from the greenhouse gas emissions that we've emitted. And that's only for over 18 years. That doesn't even talk about the legacy of our emissions. And so continuing to talk about this as a cost and avoiding the fact that there is a cost of inaction is an incomplete argument. And so we're bringing this forward to say, of course, there's a cost to do this, but it is far cheaper and far smarter for us to be investing in our people in our place, for us to be avoiding the worst impacts of climate change than it is to do nothing and bear the costs of climate change, because those costs are real and they're coming down the pipeline. So I will stop there. Please check out a20.org to learn more. Oh, sorry, that was the process in case you were here. So I'm gonna stop sharing here. Bali, back to you. I made it with 1 minute, I did it.
And actually, I'm just gonna ask Christian's question that he popped into the chat. So how can we as the administrators of the PACE program best help to advance your work, as well as advance the work of other Michigan cities with bold energy and climate action goals?
So my answer to that is, you tell me. Right? No one knows the PACE program like you know the PACE program, right? And so I can come up with ideas and they will be incomplete. So one incomplete idea is we have to activate the commercial sector. I mean, at scale, right? This cannot be piecemeal. The work that we're talking about, if I have to go door to door, business to business, I've lost. We're done. We just can't win that. So we need to find creative solutions to be able to work in partnership and at massive scale to do this. And it cannot be just Ann Arbor. Literally, the climate does not care if Ann Arbor figures this out and no one else in the region does, right? Like, we're still going to feel climate impacts. So finding solutions and perhaps using a little bit higher capacity community to do that and then transport them otherwise or outside the region, we're ready to go. So you tell me, Christian and Bali, what we need to do.
I mean, let's work together. Let's keep talking and let's keep banging down doors.
Do it.
Representing as many folks as possible. Melissa says, you said there's a cost to inaction and put a number on it. Can you give an example?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of research that talks about the social cost of carbon, and I'm happy to share some of those. I think they might actually even be in the notes on the slide, so if I share them out, I can include that. Basically, it's a number of different things. One is natural disasters. In fact, in the science community, we've been able to pinpoint how much climate is impacting many natural disasters. So they've gone from kind of this baseline to being much worse. And that incremental cost is a cost society is bearing, right? The billion-dollar disasters that are kind of bearing down on society. We are paying for that as taxpayers of this country. We literally are paying for that. And so calculating that particular cost. And then there's kind of, I mean, locally for us, that's going to be things like flooding that we experience the cost of. And then there's another piece, which actually is not really well documented in the literature, but it's something that's starting to come out. And that is the cost of not bringing people into the economy, right? So not bringing, we're not activating good paying jobs in certain sectors where we could be unlocking potential. We're leaving, in particular, Black and brown communities out of our conversation in this space, and their ideas are being left, they're not coming into the discourse at a time where we need them. So that's a softer cost. The more real cost that we see right now here today is the cost of disasters are on the rise.
Cool. All right, well, thank you so much for taking time out. You hit the home run, just like you called it like Babe Ruth. As I appreciate it. All right, well, I guess we are done with the PACE Summit. I'm going to share my screen again so I can thank the sponsors. All right, so yeah, so thanks again to our summit sponsors, PACE Loan Group, PACE Equity, and then to our breakout sponsors. Hopefully the breakout rooms did exactly as we'd hoped, and hopefully they were useful to you all. So Plug Smart, PACE Funding, Petros, Twain, Edison Energy, Greenworks, G Energy. Thanks to our supporters for getting the word out. And let's just keep working together. I mean, all of this is a task that none of us can do alone. So let's all be in touch. And thank you again for attending the virtual Southeast Michigan PACE Summit. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks, everyone.